Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. I have some news for you. A while back, I asked where you'd prefer ads, and you know what? The response was clear. Most of you said no ads at all would be better. So I've made a decision. I've turned off monetization completely. From now on, it's ad-free, just like when I started this channel. If you do see any ads, that's YouTube placing them automatically, not me. From my side, no interruptions, just pure storytelling. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. I've told this story only a handful of times in my life, and every time it feels like opening a door that never really closed. Even after all these years, it doesn't feel like something that happened a long time ago. It feels like something that is still happening somewhere in my head, on a loop I never asked for. 30-something years later, I can still hear it. I can still see it. I can still feel the moment when everything changed. It was a Saturday morning, early, around 6 or 7. We had been at a high school lock-in the night before, one of those school events meant to keep kids safe and out of trouble. Games, movies, junk food, staying up all night until morning. By the time it ended, we were exhausted but wired, that strange mix of no sleep and teenage energy. My best friend and I decided to walk home together. It had rained through a good part of the night, and it was winter. Not the soft, pretty kind of winter snow, but freezing rain. Everything was coated in about an inch of solid ice. Roads, sidewalks, trees, power lines. The world looked frozen in place, but it was slick and dangerous in a way you don't fully appreciate until you try to move through it. The sidewalks were impossible. They hadn't been shoveled before the freezing rain hit, so there were deep footprints and uneven snow underneath, now locked in place with ice on top. Walking on them felt like a guaranteed way to break an ankle. So we walked along the side of the road instead, where cars had at least worn down some of the ice. We were going uphill, a small hill, but enough that it mattered. From both sides of the hill, there was a short stretch where the road dipped out of your line of sight. You couldn't see what was coming for a couple of seconds. Normally, that wouldn't have meant much. That morning, it meant everything. We were talking about nothing important, just tired, joking, probably complaining about being cold and sore from sleeping on gym floors. It felt like any other morning walk, just slippery and slow. I remember being careful with every step, testing the ground before putting my full weight down. Then I heard a horn. I looked up and saw a car coming toward us. Inside were people we knew from school, friends, classmates. For a split second, everything felt normal. They were yelling, waving, acting excited like kids do when they see someone they know. For a moment, my friend and I thought they were just messing around, being loud. You may be driving a little wild because they were young and stupid and thought it was funny. Then it hit me. They weren't waving to say hi. They were waving because they already knew what was about to happen. The car was going way too fast for the conditions. The ice had turned the road into a skating rink, and they were completely out of control. In that instant, I realized something terrifying. They knew they couldn't stop. They knew they couldn't steer away. They knew they were going to hit us, and there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. Time didn't slow down the way people say it does. It sharpened. Every detail burned itself into my brain at once. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed my friend and jumped as hard and as far as I could. I was holding on to him with everything I had. I don't remember deciding which way to jump. I don't remember forming a plan. My body just moved. The impact came anyway. He got hit. The force of it was unreal. When the car struck him, the way his body moved didn't look human anymore. I don't even know what to compare it to. Like a rag doll being flung without resistance. The sound is what stays with me the most. That crack, I will never forget that sound. It wasn't like a crash in the movies. It was sharp, final, and wrong in a way that went straight into my bones. The way he was hit twisted me back toward the car for a split second. I saw him fly. I saw where he landed. I saw his body hit the ground in a way no one ever should. I ran to him. Somehow, through shock and adrenaline, I got to where he was. He was still awake, still breathing, still aware, at least partly. That gave me hope. Too much hope, maybe. I remember thinking, we made it through this. He's alive. We're going to be okay. I could see the injuries immediately. At least 2 compound fractures, bone where bone should never be visible. His head had clearly taken a hard hit. Blood everywhere. But he was talking. That felt like everything. He was confused, but he knew who I was. He was asking me to find his glasses. He kept saying his head hurt. That detail breaks me every time I think about it. Such a small, normal concern in the middle of absolute chaos. He wanted his glasses, like this was something that could be fixed by just finding them. I turned around, still talking to him, still telling him to hang on, and started looking around on the ground for his glasses. That's when I noticed the rest of the scene. The car was far down in the ditch, way farther than I realized. It hadn't just hit him and stopped. It had kept going, sliding, completely out of control. Almost at the same moment, I saw the power poles. They were moving. The wires were swinging, pulling the poles with them. I remember staring at them, not fully understanding what I was seeing at first. Then one of them snapped. A power pole came down. Somehow it didn't land on me. It came down between me and my friend. Just like that, there was a barrier. I couldn't get back to him. I couldn't reach him. I was yelling, trying to move around it, trying to get closer, but everything was chaos. Ice, wires, shouting, sirens starting in the distance. Then someone grabbed me. I don't even remember who it was at first. An adult, a responder. Someone strong enough to pull me away when I didn't want to move. I fought it at first. I didn't want to leave him. I was yelling that I needed to get back to him, that he was awake, that he needed me. They put me in an ambulance. I remember sitting there, shaking uncontrollably. My hands wouldn't stop moving. I could still hear that crack echoing in my head. I kept trying to look out the back doors, trying to see him, trying to make sure someone was with him. They gave me something to calm me down. It knocked me out. When I woke up, everything was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The kind of quiet that comes after something terrible, when the noise is gone but the damage remains. My friend was gone. No gentle explanation can prepare you for that moment. No amount of time softens the blow. One moment you're talking to your best friend, promising him things will be okay. The next, he's just gone. I don't remember screaming, but I know I must have. I don't remember crying right away either. Shock does strange things. It makes reality feel fake, like this is all a mistake that someone is about to correct. They didn't. I've lived with that morning for decades now. Lived with the images, the sounds, the questions. I still hear that crack. I still see the way his body bent and flew through the air like it wasn't attached to anything solid anymore. I still feel his weight in my arms when I grabbed him. I still hear him asking for his glasses. People talk about survivor's guilt like it's a phrase you can understand intellectually. You can't, not until you live it. I wished for years that the car had hit both of us, that we could have traded places, that I could have gone instead of him. He didn't deserve that. He was just walking home with his best friend after a stupid school event on an icy morning. I miss him all the time. It doesn't go away, it just changes shape. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it hits me out of nowhere. A sound, a smell, a stretch of road on a winter morning, ice on the ground, laughter from kids who don't know how fragile everything is yet. I've replayed every decision 1,000 times. Why were we on that side of the road? Why didn't we leave earlier or later? Why did I jump the way I did? Could I have pulled him harder? Could I have pushed him instead? Logic tells me there was nothing I could have done. My heart doesn't care about logic. The worst part is how ordinary it all started. Walking home, talking, laughing, no warning, no build-up, just a horn, a realization, and then violence that came from nowhere. It happened a long time ago, but it still feels close. Too close. Trauma doesn't respect calendars. It doesn't fade just because decades pass. It settles into you. It becomes part of the way you hear the world, the way you watch roads, the way you hold on to people. I don't think I'll ever forget that sound. I don't think I'll ever stop seeing the way he moved through the air. I don't think I'll ever fully forgive myself for surviving something he didn't. But I also carry him with me, in the way I look out for others, in the way I don't take mornings for granted, in the way I know, deep down, how fast life can be taken away. Without warning, that morning took my best friend. And even now, all these years later, it still feels like part of me was taken with him, left on that icy road, frozen in time, listening to a sound I will never unhear. When I was a freshman in college, I had to take an introductory biology class as a prerequisite for my major. It was a massive lecture course at a large state school, the kind designed to funnel hundreds of students through the same requirement. The lecture hall was huge, tiered seating that sloped down toward the front, with probably 150, maybe 200 students packed in each session. Most of us were 18 or 19, still figuring out how to be adults. Still half in high school mode, half pretending we knew what we were doing. Like most classes that size, the room had its usual rhythms. People filed in late, coffee in hand, backpacks slung over one shoulder. Conversations buzzed until the professor started talking. Laptops opened, notes half-heartedly taken. Most of us were there because we had to be, and not because we were deeply invested in cellular respiration or mitosis. There was one person who stood out immediately. She was an older woman who always sat right in the front row. Not just older than the rest of us, but significantly older, middle-aged, maybe older than that. She was the kind of student people quietly label as the older person going back to school. Every large lecture class seems to have one. At first, I barely noticed her beyond that surface-level observation. But over time, she became impossible not to notice. She was always prepared, always attentive. She leaned forward when the professor spoke, nodded along, raised her hand constantly, while the rest of us stared blankly at slides or scrolled on our phones. She asked thoughtful questions, not disruptive questions, not show-off questions, but genuinely engaged ones. She interacted with the professor like a peer, not a passive listener. You could tell she cared deeply about being there. At first, some people found her annoying. There were eye rolls when her hand went up again, quiet jokes whispered under breath, the unspoken frustration of freshmen who just wanted the lecture to move on so class could end. I probably rolled my eyes once or twice myself. It's easy to do that when you're young and impatient and don't yet understand what it means to really want something. But after a while, she became part of the background of the class in a different way. Familiar, expected. She was always there, front and center, engaged in a way the rest of us weren't. If the professor asked a question and no one responded, you could almost guarantee she would. She felt steady, constant. By the middle of the semester, my friends and I had settled into our usual routine. We sat together, usually a few rows up from the front, close enough to hear clearly, but far enough back to feel anonymous. We'd show up a little early, dump our bags and bullshit until class started, complaining about exams, talking about parties, laughing about dumb things, completely wrapped up in our own small worlds. That day started exactly like any other. We were sitting there joking around, half paying attention to the clock, waiting for the professor to arrive. The room slowly filled up with noise and movement. Students trickled in, seats creaked, backpacks thumped onto the floor. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt off. Then the professor walked in. She didn't walk in the way she usually did. Normally, she was composed, professional, upbeat. That day she looked shattered. Her face was red, her eyes were swollen. She was visibly crying, not trying very hard to hide it. The room quieted almost immediately, not because she demanded it, but because something was obviously wrong. She stood at the podium and tried to speak. Her voice broke. She took a breath, wiped her face, tried again. You could feel the confusion ripple through the room. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't a lecture mishap or a technical issue. This was real. She said something along the lines of, "I'm sure many of you are familiar with blank, the older woman who sits right up front." Just hearing that made my stomach drop. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. The professor paused again, struggling to keep herself together. Then she said that she had been informed that the woman and her daughters had been murdered the night before, killed by her husband. She added, almost as an aside, that the son had been spared. Apparently, the husband had a vendetta specifically against the women in the house. The words didn't land all at once. They didn't feel real. For a moment, the lecture hall was completely silent, like the air had been sucked out of it. A couple hundred teenagers who had walked in thinking about quizzes and weekend plans, suddenly confronted with something unimaginably violent. Murder. Not a headline. Not a distant story on the news. Someone we had seen every week. Someone who had sat 10 feet away from us, asking questions, taking notes, trying to better her life. She was dead, and her daughters were dead. The professor started crying harder. She said she couldn't continue with class that day. She told us class was dismissed. She mentioned that if anyone needed to talk to someone, there was a counselor available. Then she left the room. We didn't move right away. People just sat there, stunned. Some whispered. Some stared straight ahead. A few people wiped their eyes. Others looked confused, like they were waiting for someone to say, this was a mistake, that there had been some misunderstanding. It didn't feel real enough to react to properly. Eventually, people started gathering their things and filing out. But the usual energy was gone. No joking, no rushing, just quiet, heavy movement. As my friends and I walked out together, none of us really knew what to say. We mumbled a few things about how awful it was, how crazy it was, how messed up it was, but none of the words felt right. They felt too small for what had just been dropped into our laps. And that's when it hit me. I was upset class was canceled, not because I wanted to be there listening to a biology lecture, but because I wanted more time to sit with the reality of what we'd just been told. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to process it. I wanted someone to explain how something like that could happen to someone like her. It's the only time in my life I've ever felt that way. Usually, canceled class is a gift, an unexpected break, a reason to go get food or go back to sleep or do anything else. But that day, it felt wrong, like we were all being sent away from something important before we were ready. In the days that followed, the story came into focus in fragments. Bits of information passed around, articles shared quietly, details that made it worse, not better. A domestic situation that had clearly been dangerous, a husband who had decided deliberately to wipe out the women in his family, a son who was left alive, forced to carry that knowledge for the rest of his life. I kept thinking about her. I kept picturing her sitting in the front row, hand raised, engaged and curious. I thought about how she must have felt going back to school later in life, how much courage that takes, how much effort, balancing family, responsibilities, fear of not fitting in, all while surrounded by kids young enough to be her children. She didn't have to be there. She chose to be. I thought about her daughters, how they must have seen her as a role model, a woman trying to learn, to grow, to build something better. And then I thought about how violently all of that had been taken away. It changed how I looked at that lecture hall. Every time I walked in afterward, her absence was loud. The front row seat where she always sat felt wrong, even when someone else eventually took it. No one asked questions the way she did. The dynamic of the class shifted subtly but permanently. It also changed how I thought about the people around me. Up until then, most of the people in my life existed only in relation to me. Classmates, professors, background characters in my own story. That moment shattered that illusion. It forced me to realize that everyone around me was carrying entire lives I knew nothing about. Joy, fear, danger, trauma, love, abuse, all of it, hidden behind routines and schedules and assigned seats. She wasn't just the older woman in class. She was someone living in a situation dangerous enough to end her life. And none of us had any idea. That realization stuck with me far longer than any biology concept I learned that semester. Even now, years later, I still think about her sometimes, about how excited she seemed to be learning, about how seriously she took the opportunity, about how unfair it feels that someone who was clearly trying to improve her life met such a violent end. I think about how fragile everything really is, how quickly the normal rhythm of a day can be shattered by news you never see coming, how a room full of students can go from bored and distracted to stunned and grieving in the space of a few sentences. That day taught me something I didn't expect to learn in college. It taught me that education isn't just about classes and credits and degrees. It's about people. And sometimes, without warning, you're reminded that the people around you are living stories far more intense and fragile than anything happening in a lecture hall. It also taught me that violence doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it hides behind normalcy, behind someone who shows up every week, takes notes, asks questions, and goes home to a life you'll never see. Class was canceled that day, and I walked out of that building carrying something heavier than any textbook, something I didn't know how to put down, something that still resurfaces from time to time, whenever I think about how close we all are to lives we don't understand, and how suddenly those lives can end. It's strange to say, but I think that day taught me more than that biology class ever could. There are a lot of things I could talk about if the goal were just to scare someone. I've had strange encounters over the years, moments that made me question what I was seeing or hearing. Ghost stories, unexplained things, the kind of experiences people argue about late at night. But none of that even comes close to what I'm about to describe, not even in the same universe, because nothing I've ever experienced has chilled me the way watching the person I love die in front of me did. Multiple times. It happened on a night that felt completely ordinary. That's part of what makes it so disturbing. There was no warning, no sense that something was off. It was just a normal Sunday night. We had a couple of drinks, laughed, talked about nothing important, and went to bed like we had done countless times before. At that point, we had been together for a couple of years. She was my girlfriend then, the person I shared my life with. We lived with a roommate, someone I've known for more than 25 years now. Our lives were stable, familiar, safe. Or so I thought. I woke up sometime around 5 in the morning. I didn't wake up because of a noise or a dream. I woke up because something felt wrong in a way that's hard to explain. It was like my body knew before my brain caught up. I turned toward her and immediately noticed her breathing wasn't normal. It wasn't steady. It wasn't right. I said her name. I touched her. I tried to wake her up. She didn't respond. That moment stretches forever in my memory. The silence. The realization that this wasn't sleep. The sudden violent shift from groggy half-awake confusion to full, sharp panic. I remember my heart pounding so hard, it felt like it was shaking my entire chest. I tried again, louder, shaking her. Nothing. I called 911. I don't remember everything I said. I know I was trying to stay calm, trying to answer questions, trying to do exactly what they told me. Time became strange. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. I kept looking at her chest, willing it to rise normally, willing her to respond. The paramedics arrived incredibly fast, but somehow not fast enough. Right before they got there, she stopped breathing. I remember that moment with horrifying clarity. The way the room seemed to narrow, the sound of my own breathing in my ears, the way my hands felt useless, helpless. I remember thinking very clearly that this could not be happening, that this was some kind of mistake. They came in and immediately took over. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. They moved with practiced urgency, doing things I barely understood at the time. I stood back, frozen, watching strangers work on the person I loved, while my entire world felt like it was collapsing inward. They used the paddles. She came back. For a moment. She woke up briefly a couple of times after they shocked her. Her eyes opened, but she wasn't really there. She was incoherent, confused, not herself. But she was alive. And that tiny detail became everything. I clung to it like it was the only solid thing left in reality. Then she slipped away again. I don't know how many times her heart stopped that morning. I just know it was more than once. Each time felt like losing her all over again. Each time brought a new wave of terror, a new moment of absolute dread that this would be the one she didn't come back from. There's a lot of the story that exists in fragments, being questioned, blood work being done, doctors and paramedics talking in medical language that meant nothing to me at the time. I was completely clueless about what the results meant, what they were looking for, what was causing this. All I knew was that she was dying and no one could tell me why. At some point she was stabilized enough to be taken to the hospital. I followed in a daze, barely aware of anything except the fact that she was still breathing, still here. For now, she lived. That sentence feels strange to write because it skips over so much pain and fear. She survived the immediate crisis, but the aftermath was brutal in its own way. The doctors were not optimistic. There was real concern about brain damage. Oxygen deprivation does horrible things, and they warned us that even if she survived, she might never be the same. For months, she wasn't. Her motor functions were severely affected. Simple movements were difficult. Coordination was off. Her body didn't always do what she told it to do. Watching her struggle with things that had once been effortless was heartbreaking in a way I still have trouble putting into words. Every day felt like walking through fog, waiting for answers that might never come. We were told to expect permanent damage. That phrase gets burned into your mind when you hear it about someone you love. Permanent damage, not maybe, not we'll see. Permanent, as in, this is the rest of your life now. I remember one day in particular when my mother-in-law looked at me and said, lying quietly and honestly, that she probably wouldn't snap out of it. There was no drama in her voice, no hysteria, just grief and resignation. She was a mother bracing herself for a future she never wanted to imagine. I looked back at her and said, I know. And I did know. Or at least I thought I did. I had already started grieving a version of the woman I loved who might never fully come back. I had started adjusting my expectations. I was preparing myself to accept whatever life looked like now, because there was no other choice. That was one of the hardest parts, the waiting. the uncertainty, the slow, painful process of realizing that survival didn't automatically mean recovery, that saving her life didn't mean saving everything that made her who she was. But then something incredible happened. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she started to come back. A little more coordination, a little more clarity, a little more of her personality shining through the fog. Progress wasn't linear. There were good days and bad days, setbacks and small victories, but over time, the changes added up. Against expectations, she recovered, not partially, not well considering. Fully. Today, she is perfectly normal. More than that, she's thriving. She's doing well in her career. She functions at a level that no one who didn't know the story would ever question. There are no obvious lasting effects, no signs that she once hovered on the edge of death, while doctors warned us to prepare for the worst. If you didn't know what happened, you would never guess. There's even a strange, almost darkly humorous footnote to the whole thing. She had a bald spot from the incident, something that lingered as a quiet reminder of how close she came to not making it. A couple of years ago, even that disappeared. Her body, in its own time, erased one of the last visible signs of what she survived. The only lasting issue she seems to have, as far as I can tell, is marrying me. I joke about that, but humor has always been one of the ways we cope. You don't go through something like this without developing a different relationship to fear, to gratitude, to what really matters. What stays with me isn't just the terror of that morning, though that terror still lives somewhere deep inside me. It's the contrast. How ordinary the night was before everything went wrong. How quickly life can flip from comfortable and familiar to catastrophic. How you can go to sleep next to the person you love and wake up unsure if they'll still be alive by sunrise. I've replayed that morning in my head more times than I can count. The sound of my own voice on the phone with 911, the way the paramedics moved, the moment her chest stopped rising, the brief flickers of awareness after the paddles. Those images don't fade. They don't soften. They just become part of who you are. People talk about ghosts and hauntings as if fear always comes from the unknown. But the truth is, the most frightening experiences are often painfully real. They happen in your bedroom, in your home, with the person you love most in the world, lying in front of you, slipping away while you can't do anything but watch. That kind of fear doesn't scream. It doesn't jump out at you. It settles into your bones. Even now, when everything is okay, when she's healthy and living her life, there's a part of me that never fully relaxes. A part of me that listens too closely to breathing in the dark. That wakes up instantly if something feels off. Trauma has a way of rewiring you like that. You don't notice it day to day, but it's there. At the same time, that fear is matched by gratitude so intense, it sometimes feels overwhelming. Gratitude that she's here. Gratitude that she recovered. Gratitude that the ending, against all odds, was a good one. I know how rare that is. I know how easily this story could have gone another way. I know how close I came to losing her. That knowledge never really leaves you, but it does something else too. It sharpens your sense of what matters. It makes small problems seem smaller. It makes ordinary days feel precious in a way they never did before. I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, things I can't fully explain, but none of them compare to watching death stand at the foot of my bed and deciding somehow to step back. That was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, and it's also the reason I don't take a single normal, boring, quiet night for granted anymore. There are some stories that feel heavy the moment you start telling them, like the weight is already there, waiting. The Wineville chicken coop murders are one of those. Even trying to summarize them feels wrong. Like the facts alone don't capture the damage done, or the fear, or the long shadow it cast over the people involved. It's a story that hurts to remember, not because it's shocking in a sensational way, but because it's rooted in cruelty, control, and the suffering of a child who never should have had to endure any of it. In 1926, a 13-year-old boy from Canada was sent to California to live with his uncle. His name was Sanford Clark. At the time, this probably seemed like an opportunity, or at least a reasonable arrangement. Families trusted relatives in a way that feels almost unthinkable now. There was no reason, on the surface, to believe that sending a boy to live with his uncle would lead to anything but work, schooling, and a chance at a better life. The uncle was Gordon Stewart Northcott, and he was only 21 years old at the time. From the moment Sanford arrived, the reality of his situation was nothing like what his family had been led to believe. Instead of school, safety, or guidance, Sanford entered a world of constant fear. His uncle physically abused him, mentally broke him down, and sexually assaulted him. This wasn't occasional violence. It was systematic. It was deliberate. It was designed to dominate and control a child who had no power and nowhere to escape. For 2 years, Sanford lived under his uncle's control. During that time, his family back in Canada believed he was attending school and living a normal life. That belief was maintained through letters Sanford was forced to write. His uncle dictated what he was allowed to say, what lies he had to repeat, what reassurances he had to give. Every word was controlled. Every message home was a fabrication designed to keep suspicion away. In reality, Sanford was being used as a slave. He worked endlessly. He was isolated. He was threatened constantly. His uncle made it clear that if Sanford disobeyed him, spoke out, or tried to escape, he would be killed. That threat wasn't abstract. Sanford knew exactly what his uncle was capable of because he was forced to witness it. Northcott didn't just abuse Sanford, he murdered other children. Over the course of those 2 years, Northcott kidnapped, tortured, and killed at least 3 young boys. These crimes took place at a rural property in Wineville, California, where Northcott lived with his mother. The murders were carried out in and around a chicken coop on the property, which is where the case gets its grim name, the Wineville Chicken Coop Murders. The setting itself adds another layer of horror. Something as ordinary as a farm structure became a place of unimaginable cruelty. Sanford was not just a witness to these crimes. He was forced to assist in covering them up. His uncle coerced him into helping dispose of bodies and hide evidence. The psychological damage of that cannot be overstated. This wasn't just a child witnessing violence. This was a child being manipulated into believing that his own survival depended on his silence and obedience. At times, Northcott's mother was also involved in the cover-up. She helped conceal at least one murder, choosing loyalty to her son over the lives of children and the truth. The betrayal there is staggering. A grandmother figure, someone who should have protected children, instead participated in hiding their deaths. That knowledge haunted Sanford as well. It reinforced the idea that no adult in that environment was safe, and no one could be trusted. Sanford lived every day under the threat of death. He knew that the same fate that had met those boys could meet him at any moment. His uncle made sure of that. Fear was the foundation of everything. Fear kept him quiet. Fear kept him compliant. Fear kept him alive. Eventually, cracks began to form. Sanford found moments, however small, where he could hint at the truth. He managed to communicate with his family in ways that raised concern. The authorities were eventually alerted, and the case began to unravel. When investigators became involved, the scale of the crime slowly came into focus. Northcott was arrested, tried, and convicted. In 1930, he was executed by hanging. For many people, that fact feels like a clean ending. Justice served. evil punished. But for Sanford, the end of Northcott's life did not mean the end of the trauma. Sanford had survived something that reshaped him completely. He was still young, but his childhood was gone. It had been stolen through abuse, terror, and forced complicity in crimes no child should ever be near. He carried not only the memories of what his uncle did to him, but also the guilt and horror of being forced to help cover up the murders of other children. Even though he had no real choice, that burden stayed with him. After the trial and execution, Sanford tried to build a life. He grew up. He became an adult. On the surface, he did what society expects survivors to do. He moved forward. He married. He worked. He tried to be normal. But the past never truly left him. One of the most heartbreaking details of Sanford's later life is his decision not to have biological children. He was terrified that he might somehow pass on his uncle's evil. Rationally, there was no reason to believe that abuse or murder were inherited traits. But trauma doesn't follow logic. Fear doesn't care about genetics or reason. Sanford had seen what his uncle was capable of, and the thought that anything of that man could live on through him was unbearable. Instead, Sanford and his wife adopted 2 children. That choice says so much about the lasting impact of what he endured. It wasn't just fear, it was responsibility. He wanted to love children without the shadow of his uncle hanging over him. He wanted to be a father without wondering if the past could repeat itself. Adoption gave him a way to build a family that felt safe, controlled, and free from that particular terror. Even so, the damage was done. Trauma doesn't disappear because someone survives. It reshapes how you see the world, how you see yourself, and how you relate to others. Sanford spent his life carrying the weight of those years. He was known to struggle with mental health issues, and he never fully escaped the psychological scars left by his uncle. What makes the Wineville chicken coop murders especially painful to think about is that they weren't just about one monster. They were about a system of control that trapped a child and used him as a tool. They were about how easily trust can be exploited, how family ties can be weaponized, how silence can be enforced through fear. The story also exposes how vulnerable children are when adults fail them. Sanford was failed repeatedly by his uncle, by his grandmother figure, by the distance that allowed lies to go unquestioned for too long. He survived not because the system protected him, but because he endured long enough for the truth to surface. Wineville itself would never be the same. The town later changed its name to try to escape the association with the murders. But changing a name doesn't erase history. It doesn't undo what happened in that chicken coop, or what happened to the children whose lives were taken there. Yet for many people who learn about this case, the details are overwhelming. The abuse, the manipulation, the murders, the forced letters, the threats. It's easy to feel sick thinking about it. It's easy to feel angry. It's easy to feel helpless in the face of something so cruel. But at the center of it all is a boy who survived. Sanford Clark didn't emerge unscathed. No one could. But he lived. He testified. He told the truth. He helped bring an end to his uncle's crimes. And despite everything, he tried to build a life that didn't mirror the one forced on him. That doesn't make the story less tragic. If anything, it makes it more so, because it reminds us that survival is not the same as healing, and justice doesn't undo what was taken. The Wineville chicken coop murders aren't just a true crime case. They're a reminder of how power, cruelty, and silence can destroy lives. They're a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters, and that the most horrifying acts can happen behind closed doors, hidden by lies and threats. And they're a reminder of the strength it takes to live after something like that. To wake up every day carrying memories no child should have, and still choose not to become what hurt you. Even trying to talk about it can bring tears. That alone says everything about how deep the horror runs. After some years working in criminal court, I collected more disturbing memories than I ever expected to. You can't work around prisons, courtrooms, and recently released inmates without seeing the darker edges of people. You hear stories, you read files, you learn not to be easily shocked. Violence, abuse, cruelty, desperation, all of it becomes part of the background noise of the job. But out of everything I saw and heard during that time, the scariest thing that ever happened to me wasn't something written in a file or described in a courtroom. It was something that unfolded quietly, in real time, right in front of me, without me realizing what I was looking at until it was far too late. At the time, I was working as a clerk. My job was to provide judicial information for people who had just been released from prison. I helped them understand their paperwork, conditions, next steps, and what they needed to do to move forward. Things like where to report, how to fix missing documents, what was required to rent a place, apply for work, or stay compliant with the law. It wasn't an easy job, but it was routine. Most of the people who came through were anxious, confused, angry, or exhausted. Many didn't understand legal procedures very well. Some barely spoke. Others were hostile or withdrawn. You got used to certain patterns. That's why the man who walked in one day immediately stood out to me. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't confused. In fact, he was the opposite. He was extremely talkative, confident, and surprisingly well-informed about legal procedures. That alone was unusual. Most people leaving prison don't have a clear or detailed understanding of judicial systems, especially not to the level he did. He spoke easily, almost casually, using legal terms correctly. He knew what forms were supposed to exist, where delays usually happened, and what steps came next. He explained things instead of asking questions. It felt less like I was guiding him and more like we were having a conversation between colleagues. That should have been a red flag, but at the time it just felt odd, not alarming. He told me that something had gone wrong with his papers, that they were stuck somewhere in the system. He needed them to move forward with his life, to rent a house, to find a job, to exist, basically. He spoke about it with frustration, but also with a kind of practiced calm, as if he'd rehearsed this conversation many times. While he was talking to me, there was a woman standing in line behind him. She looked nervous and overwhelmed, like many people do in those situations. At some point, she asked him something quietly, and without hesitation, he turned and started helping her. He explained what had happened with her husband, who was imprisoned. He talked about procedures, timelines, options. He spoke clearly and confidently, like someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. He was kind, patient, and reassuring. The woman seemed relieved, grateful even. From the outside, it looked like a small, human moment. One person helping another in a stressful place. After that, I helped the woman with what she needed. She thanked me softly. The man, without another word, he had turned his back to her and walked out of the room. That's when everything shifted. As the woman gathered her things, she leaned closer to me. Her voice dropped into a whisper. Her eyes were wide and she looked genuinely frightened. She said very quietly, "I don't know this man." There was no drama in her voice, no exaggeration, just fear. She left immediately after that, almost rushing out, and I was left sitting there, staring at my desk, thinking, what the hell just happened? It took me a moment to process what she meant. I replayed the interaction in my head, the way he spoke to her, the confidence, the familiarity, the assumption that it was normal for him to insert himself into her situation, the way she had accepted the help because she was vulnerable and overwhelmed. And then the realization hit me. He had positioned himself as a safe, knowledgeable presence without being asked. He had slipped into her life for a few minutes, created trust, and then vanished. And she had no idea who he was. That unsettled me deeply, but there was nothing concrete I could do with that feeling. He hadn't broken any rules. He hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't done anything technically wrong in that moment. So I filed it away mentally as strange, uncomfortable, and disturbing, but unresolved. Days passed. Then he came back. He returned to my desk 2 more times over the next days, always for the same reason. His papers were still stuck. He still needed them to move on with his life. Each time he talked easily, too easily. He filled the space with words. He explained delays before I could. He seemed to know what I was going to say before I said it. But something about him made my skin crawl. I couldn't pinpoint it exactly. It wasn't anything obvious. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't rude. But there was something off. He rarely looked me directly in the eye. His gaze slid past me or lingered just beside my face. When he did make eye contact, it felt empty, like there was nothing behind it. And then there was the bag. He always carried a plastic bag with him, not a backpack, not a briefcase, just a simple plastic bag, the kind you'd get from a store. It looked light, but not empty. And while we talked, I noticed he was always touching it, adjusting it, holding it close, running his fingers over it absently, almost like a nervous habit. At first I thought nothing of it. Lots of people carry bags, lots of people fidget. But over time, I became more aware of it. The way he never put it down, the way it stayed within reach, the way his hand would drift back to it again and again, even while he was talking. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. Weeks passed after his last visit, and life returned to normal. Other people came in, other cases, other paperwork. The man faded into the background of my memory. Just another strange person in a job full of strange people. Then a 16-year-old girl from the town went missing. At first, it was just a headline, a teenager missing. That happens more often than people like to admit. Runaways, miscommunications, delays. Everyone hoped she'd turn up safe. Days went by, and the tone changed. It became serious, urgent. Then the footage was released. The security footage showed the girl being dragged into a car by a man. When I saw the image, my stomach dropped. It was him. The man I had been helping. The man who talked too much. The man who helped a woman he didn't know. The man who never looked me in the eye. The man with the plastic bag. I remember feeling physically cold as I watched the news. My hands started shaking. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was echoing in my ears. I couldn't breathe properly. Everything in my body reacted before my mind fully caught up. Then they released more details. The police said he had used a rope and a knife to kill the girl. The footage showed the items. And then they mentioned the bag, the plastic bag he used to carry them around. The same bag. The one he always had with him. The one he touched while he spoke to me. The one he carried into my workplace, into a public building, into a place that was supposed to be safe. I remember sitting there, frozen, thinking about how close he had been to me, how many times he stood across my desk, how calmly he spoke, how normal he seemed, how easily he blended in, how no one suspected a thing. I thought about the woman in line, her whispered fear, her instinct, how she knew something wasn't right even before anything terrible was known. I shivered for months after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there. I replayed every conversation, every gesture, every moment he touched that bag. I kept thinking about how I had spoken to a murderer without knowing it. How I had helped him with paperwork that would allow him to go on with his life. The guilt was irrational, but it was there. A deep, sick feeling that I had unknowingly assisted someone who was capable of unimaginable violence. I questioned my judgment constantly. I wondered if I should have trusted my instincts more, if I should have said something. if I should have flagged him somehow. But the truth is there was nothing concrete to report at the time. No threats, no confessions, just a feeling. And feelings don't hold up in court. What haunted me the most was how ordinary he was. He wasn't frantic, he wasn't visibly dangerous, he didn't fit the stereotype people want to believe in. He was articulate, polite, helpful. He knew how to behave. He knew how to appear harmless. That's what scared me. Not the crime itself, horrific as it was, but the realization that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like someone asking for help. Sometimes they look like someone helping others. For a long time, I couldn't get his face out of my head. It would appear randomly in quiet moments, in dreams, in reflections. I felt constantly on edge, hyper-aware of people's behavior, their tone, their eyes, their hands. Over the years, that faded. Time did what it always does. The sharp edges dulled, the image softened. Eventually, I realized I could no longer clearly picture his face. That brought a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because the fear loosened its grip. Sadness because forgetting felt wrong somehow, considering what he did. But I will never forget the lesson. I learned that evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't always come with warning signs loud enough for systems to catch. Sometimes it sits across from you talking about paperwork, holding a plastic bag, waiting for the right moment elsewhere. And sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what someone does, but how close they can get to you before you ever realize who they really are. When I think back on it now, it's hard to believe how casually we treated that place. At the time, it was just another spot to hang out, another place teenagers went because it felt hidden, quiet, and slightly forbidden. None of us had any idea what was really happening there, and that ignorance is what makes the memory so unsettling all these years later. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Like a lot of neighborhoods there, it was dense, loud, and busy, but there were pockets of quiet if you knew where to look. One of my close friends lived in a house whose backyard backed right up against a cemetery. It wasn't some famous or historic place people visited often. It was old, worn, and mostly forgotten. The kind of cemetery where headstones lean, grass grows unevenly, and entire sections feel abandoned. As teenagers, we were always looking for somewhere to drink without getting caught. Someone's basement, an alley, a park after dark. Eventually, the cemetery became our spot. It felt perfect. Nobody went there at night. There were no houses facing it directly. You could slip in through the back fence and disappear among the graves. It was quiet, eerie in a fun way, and far enough removed from the street that we felt safe from cops or neighbors calling us in. We'd go there at night, usually on weekends. We'd sit on cold stone markers, pass around cheap alcohol, laugh too loud, talk about nothing and everything. At that age, you don't think about respect or consequences much. To us, the cemetery wasn't a sacred place. It was just empty land with rocks sticking out of it. We didn't think about the people buried there. We didn't think about who might be watching. Every once in a while, something would happen that reminded us we weren't completely alone. Sometimes lights would appear in the distance. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps. Occasionally, someone would shout. More than once, we got chased out of the cemetery by people we assumed were security guards. We'd hear yelling, see flashlights sweeping across the ground, and we'd run. Hearts pounding, laughing afterward, adrenaline still high. We treated it like a game. We told ourselves it was normal. Cemeteries have caretakers, groundskeepers, night watchmen. Of course, they didn't want drunk teenagers hanging around graves. We never questioned it beyond that. We never stopped going back. Looking back, that alone feels wrong. If you get chased out of a place repeatedly, common sense says you stop returning, but we didn't. Teenagers don't listen to common sense. We felt untouchable. We thought the worst thing that could happen was getting yelled at or maybe having the cops called. We were very wrong. Years later, long after we had stopped hanging out there, the truth came out. And when it did, it completely reframed every memory I had of that cemetery. It turned out that some of the cemetery staff were involved in something horrifying. What they were doing was systematic, calculated, and deeply disturbing. They would go through cemetery records and identify which graves were never visited. No flowers, no candles, no signs of family coming back year after year. Graves that had effectively been forgotten, people with no living relatives nearby, or none at all. Immigrants, poor families, older burials. People who had slipped quietly out of memory. Those were the graves they targeted. At night, under the cover of darkness, they would dig up the bodies from those plots. They would remove the remains and rebury them together in a mass grave. A single pit hidden near the edge of the cemetery, not far from my friend's backyard. Then they would clean up the original plots, make them look untouched, and resell them to new families. The money didn't go to the cemetery, they pocketed it. It's hard to overstate how messed up that is. Not just illegal, but morally disgusting. These were people entrusted with maintaining a place of rest for the dead, and instead they were treating bodies like inventory, moving them, stacking them, erasing them, all for cash. No one knew this was happening for a long time. The scheme only came to light by accident. A telephone pole near the cemetery needed to be replaced. A utility worker started digging, expecting nothing more than dirt and maybe some old debris. Instead, he hit bones. Not one body, many, a mass grave. The discovery set off a massive investigation. Police were called. The area was secured. News spread quickly once the details started coming out. Families were notified. Records were re-examined. The cemetery's history was scrutinized. What had once been dismissed as neglect or poor record-keeping was suddenly revealed to be deliberate fraud and abuse of the dead. When I heard about it, my stomach dropped. That mass grave was near where we used to hang out, near where we used to drink, laugh, and sit on the ground, near where we'd been chased away at night by people we assumed were security. Suddenly, those memories took on a completely different meaning. Those people chasing us weren't just annoyed caretakers trying to protect property. There's a real chance they were trying to protect a secret, trying to keep anyone from lingering too long, from wandering into the wrong area, from seeing something they weren't supposed to see. And that's when the question hit me hard. What would have happened if they had caught us? At the time, we never thought about that. We assumed the worst-case scenario was getting yelled at, maybe having our parents called, maybe spending a night in a police station. Now, knowing what was really going on, those assumptions feel naive. We were witnesses without knowing it. Teenagers stumbling around drunk in the dark don't follow rules. We wandered, we explored. We cut through sections of the cemetery that probably weren't meant to be seen. If one night we had gone a little farther, if someone had tripped over something sticking out of the ground, if we had noticed disturbed soil or uncovered remains, if we had seen the mass grave. There's no way to know what those men would have done in that situation. But it's hard not to imagine the worst. They were already committing serious crimes, desecrating graves, defrauding families, hiding bodies. People who cross that line don't usually stop at intimidation. Would they have threatened us, hurt us, framed us for vandalism, called the police and spun a story that put us in danger, or something worse? The fact that we were kids doesn't automatically mean we would have been safe. In some situations, it makes you more vulnerable, not less. Drunk, alone, at night, in a place where no one was supposed to be. Easy to silence, easy to discredit. I think about those nights we ran laughing, adrenaline pumping, convinced we'd escaped some harmless authority figure. I think about how close we might have been to uncovering something we weren't meant to see. And I think about how thin the line was between a stupid teenage memory and a true crime story with a very different ending. What chills me most is how ordinary it all felt at the time. There were no obvious warning signs, no sinister music playing in the background, no clear sense that something deeply wrong was happening under our feet. The cemetery looked neglected, not criminal. The staff looked like staff, not monsters. The chase felt routine, not desperate. That's how real evil often operates, quietly, boringly, hidden behind uniforms and paperwork. The idea that bodies were being dug up and stacked in a mass grave while families believed their loved ones were resting peacefully is disturbing enough. But knowing that we were right there, unknowingly sharing space with that crime, makes it personal in a way that's hard to shake. Sometimes I think about the people buried there, about how their graves were erased, reused, sold again, about how their memory was literally dug up and discarded because no one was watching anymore. It makes you realize how vulnerable the dead are once the living stop caring. And then I think about us, a group of dumb kids drinking cheap alcohol among headstones, completely unaware of how dangerous that place actually was. We thought we were the ones doing something wrong, trespassing, drinking, being disrespectful. Meanwhile, the real crime was happening deeper in the dark. Even now, years later, that question still lingers. What would have happened if they did catch us? Not chase us off, not scare us away, actually catch us, corner us, ask questions, decide we were a problem. I don't think I want to know the answer. All I know is that we were lucky. Lucky that we never stumbled onto the truth ourselves. Lucky that the mass grave was discovered by accident and not by a group of teenagers who wouldn't have known what to do with that information. Lucky that whatever force chased us off always chose distance instead of confrontation. The south side of Chicago has plenty of dark stories. This is one that still makes my skin crawl, not because of ghosts or superstition, but because of how real it was, how close it was, how hidden it was in plain sight. A cemetery is supposed to be a place of rest, of respect, of finality. Instead, it was a crime scene we partied next to, completely unaware. And sometimes that's the most disturbing kind of horror. Not the things that jump out at you, but the things that were there the whole time, waiting quietly underground while life went on above them like nothing was wrong at all. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. This story comes from a time that feels almost unreal now. From an era when things we take for granted today were rare luxuries. Hot water heaters were not common in every home. Many families lived without them, especially those working farms where money was tight and daily life followed strict routines, shaped by daylight, weather, and hard labor. It was a young family living on a farm. Simple life, long days, early mornings. The father worked out in the fields, doing the kind of physical labor that demanded he leave the house before the sun came up. Every morning followed the same pattern. He would wake quietly, get dressed in the dark, eat a small meal if there was time, and head out to work while his wife stayed behind with their baby boy, who was under 6 months old. That morning began no differently than any other. The father left before daylight, walking out into the fields while the house behind him settled back into silence. Inside, his wife began her usual morning routine. Caring for a baby in those days was exhausting. There were no modern conveniences, no disposable diapers, no easy ways to heat water quickly. Everything took effort, everything took time. At some point after the father left, something went terribly wrong. Out in the fields, the father noticed something that immediately felt off. The lights had not been turned on. This may sound small now, but at the time, it mattered. Lights were a signal, a sign of activity, a reassurance that life inside the house was continuing as expected. The absence of that light gnawed at him. He tried to reason it away at first, but the feeling wouldn't leave him. Something was wrong. Trusting that instinct, he left the field early and headed back toward the house. When he arrived, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the wrong kind. The house felt still in a way that set his nerves on edge. He stepped inside and was immediately met with chaos. The kitchen was destroyed, shrapnel was everywhere, furniture overturned. The space looked like something had violently exploded without warning, and there, on the kitchen floor, lay his wife. She was dead. The shock of that sight alone would have been enough to break most people, but the nightmare wasn't over. As his eyes scanned the room in disbelief, panic surged through him as he remembered the baby. He rushed to the sink. Inside it, submerged in cold water, was his infant son. The baby looked blue in the poor light, lifeless, still. In that moment, the father believed he had lost everything. But when he reached into the sink and touched the child, something incredible happened. The baby responded. A tiny movement, a sign of life. Against all odds, the child was still alive. Adrenaline took over. The father immediately pulled his son from the water and began working to warm him. He did whatever he could, instinctively, desperately driven by pure survival instinct and love. There was no medical training, no instructions, just a father refusing to let go. Amazingly, the baby survived. Later, it became clear what had happened. The water heater, located near the sink, had exploded. These early hot water heaters were crude, dangerous by modern standards, and prone to catastrophic failure. When it exploded, metal shrapnel tore through the kitchen. One piece struck the mother, severing a major artery in her throat. She would have died almost instantly. There was nothing she could have done. No chance to escape. No time to react. Based on the condition of her body and the state of the home, it was believed the explosion happened early in the morning, during her normal routine. She had likely been bathing her baby in the sink, using the heater to warm the water. The explosion killed her instantly, and her body collapsed to the floor. The baby, still in the sink, was left alone. Hours passed. During that time, the child somehow did not drown. The position of the body, the way the water drained or shifted, the sheer randomness of physics and chance all played a role. On top of that, the baby endured prolonged exposure to cold water, risking severe hypothermia, and yet, he lived. The child grew up. He became our neighbor, and he was one of the most remarkable people I have ever known. Knowing the story of his beginning changed the way everyone saw him. He carried no memory of that day, of course, but the weight of it lingered in the family and in the community. He was raised by a father who had lost his wife in the most horrific, sudden way imaginable, and who had nearly lost his child as well. The survival itself feels almost impossible when you think about it. A baby surviving not only the trauma of being left unattended in water for hours, but also the cold, the shock, and the chaos that surrounded him. Modern medicine would struggle with a case like that. In that time period, in a rural farmhouse, it bordered on miraculous. People often talk about luck or fate or divine intervention when stories like this come up. Whatever you believe, it's hard not to feel that something extraordinary occurred that morning. A chain of events that should have ended in total loss somehow left one small life behind. The tragedy never left the family. The father carried that grief for the rest of his life. The loss of a spouse is devastating under any circumstances, but to walk into your home and discover it that way, knowing she had died alone and suddenly, is something that never truly heals. And yet, in the midst of that horror, there was also survival. a reminder that even in the worst moments, life can cling on in ways that defy logic. The baby grew into a man who was kind, resilient, and deeply human. Knowing where he came from made his presence feel even more meaningful. Every laugh, every conversation, every ordinary moment carried an unspoken weight. He was living proof that survival doesn't always make sense, and that sometimes the smallest, most vulnerable lives endure when there is no reason they should. What makes the story especially haunting is how ordinary it all began. A routine morning, a mother bathing her child, a father going to work. No warning, no storm, no slow buildup, just a sudden, violent failure of something meant to help, meant to provide comfort. It's a reminder of how dangerous early technology could be, how fragile daily life once was, and how quickly everything could be taken away. It's also a reminder of how unpredictable survival can be. That child should not have lived, and yet he did. And because of that, his life felt like a quiet miracle walking around among the rest of us. One of my college friends told me this story years ago, and even now it still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. It's one of those experiences that doesn't feel terrifying in the moment the way some things do, but becomes horrifying afterward when you realize just how close you came to something irreversible. Before coming to Canada to study, she had lived in South Korea. She was used to city life, used to walking places on her own, used to being aware of her surroundings without constantly feeling afraid. What happened to her didn't start with screaming alarms or an obvious threat. It started quietly, in a way that almost felt mundane. One night, she was walking home to her apartment complex. It wasn't especially late, and the area wasn't unfamiliar to her. As she walked, she became aware of a man behind her. At first, it barely registered. People walk the same routes all the time. Someone being behind you isn't unusual. What caught her attention was how visible he was. He wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't ducking into doorways or pretending to look at his phone. He was just there, behind her, close enough that she could clearly see him whenever she glanced back. That alone felt strange. Most people instinctively create distance, either falling back or passing you. He did neither. She looked over her shoulder again. He was closer. At that point, her unease sharpened. She slowed her pace slightly, half expecting him to pass her. He didn't. Instead, he matched her speed. When she sped up, he sped up too. She could feel the space between them shrinking, step by step. Her heart started to race. She told me that what unsettled her most wasn't just that he was following her, but how unconcerned he seemed about being noticed. There was no attempt to pretend this was accidental. It was as if he didn't care whether she knew he was there. She kept looking back, and each time he was closer than before. At that point, instinct took over. She broke into a run. Her apartment complex was just ahead. She ran as hard as she could, keys already in her hand. Her thoughts narrowed to one simple goal: get inside. She could hear her own breathing, the sound of her footsteps, and behind her, the faint echo of someone else, moving quickly too. She reached the entrance and rushed through the secured gate, just as it was closing. Inside there was a security guard on duty, sitting at his post. The presence of another person, especially someone in uniform, brought an immediate rush of relief. She turned around. The man was standing on the other side of the gate. He didn't shout. He didn't bang on it. He didn't try to force his way in. He just stood there, staring through the barrier, watching. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. It was as if he were deciding something, or memorizing something, or simply accepting that this particular opportunity had slipped away. After a while, he turned and walked off. Shaken but unharmed, she went up to her apartment. She told herself that it was probably just a creepy guy, someone with bad boundaries, someone who made her uncomfortable but didn't actually intend to do anything. She tried to rationalize it, the way people often do when nothing terrible has technically happened. She went to sleep. The next morning, now everything changed. She turned on the news and froze. Police had arrested a serial killer overnight. They showed his photo on the screen. As soon as she saw his face, her blood ran cold. It was him, the man who had followed her the night before, the man who had been openly closing the distance behind her, the man who had stood outside the gate of her apartment complex, watching before finally walking away. The realization hit her all at once, that she hadn't been imagining it, that her fear hadn't been overreaction or paranoia, that the reason he hadn't bothered hiding was because he didn't need to, that the reason he walked away so calmly was because he'd already done what he'd come to do elsewhere, or because he'd simply lost access to her. She told me later that the thought that kept repeating in her mind was how ordinary the night had felt until it suddenly wasn't, how close she had come without realizing it at the time, how the difference between her being alive and becoming another victim came down to a secured entrance and a guard being on duty. She never walked home the same way again. Even years later, she said that memories still surfaced sometimes without warning. A man walking too close behind her, the sound of footsteps matching her own, the feeling of being watched without knowing why. What makes the story so chilling isn't just that she encountered a serial killer. It's how easily it could have been dismissed if things had gone slightly differently, if she hadn't made it inside in time, if there hadn't been a gate, if there hadn't been a guard, if she'd convinced herself she was being silly and slowed down instead of running. It's terrifying how thin that line can be. She escaped without a scratch, but the knowledge of how close she came stayed with her. A quiet reminder that sometimes your instincts are the only warning you get, and sometimes the danger you walk away from doesn't reveal itself until it's already been caught on the news, wearing the same face you saw just hours before. When I was 9 years old, my life changed in a way that never truly reversed. My sister killed herself. Even writing that sentence still feels unreal, like it belongs to someone else's story and not mine. She had been diagnosed with depression, and there was strong suspicion that she also had schizophrenia, though I don't know if it was ever officially confirmed. What I do know is that she struggled deeply, in ways that were far beyond what a family like ours knew how to handle. As a kid, I didn't understand diagnoses or mental illness. I only understood that my sister was sad, distant, and sometimes afraid of things I couldn't see. Her death shattered our family. It didn't just bring grief, it brought silence, confusion, and a kind of heaviness that settled into every corner of our lives. My mother was never the same afterward. Within a year, she was diagnosed with PTSD. Looking back now, that diagnosis makes complete sense. She had lost a child in the most violent and irreversible way possible, inside the home where we were supposed to be safe. That kind of trauma doesn't fade. It embeds itself into your body, your thoughts, and your environment. About a year after my sister died, strange things started happening in the house. At first, they were small, easy to ignore, easy to explain away if you didn't want to think too hard about them. The light in my bedroom began flickering randomly, not the kind of flicker where a bulb is clearly dying, but sudden, sharp flickers that would happen for no obvious reason. Sometimes it would stop for weeks, then start again out of nowhere. We changed the bulb. It kept happening. We checked the wiring, but nothing was ever found to be wrong. There were also nights when I would wake up and my bedroom light would be on, even though I knew I had turned it off before going to sleep. At the time, it didn't scare me the way it probably should have. I was a kid. I assumed maybe I forgot. Maybe my mom came in to check on me and left it on. It didn't feel like a red flag. It felt like one of those small, unimportant things that didn't deserve much attention. As time went on, the activity became harder to ignore. Objects in my room started moving in ways that made no sense. There were multiple times when books would suddenly fly off my desk and land on the floor. Not slide, not slowly tip over. They would be flat on the desk one moment, and the next moment they would be on the floor, scattered, as if someone had swiped them with force. I remember freezing the first time it happened, staring at the books, trying to figure out how gravity could explain that. It couldn't. One moment that stands out more than the others is something I still think about regularly. One day, every picture and painting on my bedroom wall fell at the same time. Not one or two, all of them. They didn't tilt or slowly come loose. They dropped straight down and hit the floor, almost in unison. The sound alone was shocking enough to make my heart race. I remember standing there, staring at the bare wall, feeling this deep, cold confusion settle into my chest. What made it even stranger was where these things happened. Almost all of it happened in my room. Rarely did anything occur in other parts of the house. It wasn't like the entire place felt chaotic or out of control. It felt focused, not targeted, like whatever was happening had chosen a specific space. My space. As a kid, that made me uncomfortable in a way I didn't have the words to explain. It felt personal, even though I didn't understand why. There were other things too. Small, creepy moments that didn't leave clear memories but left impressions instead. Sounds that didn't have a source. A feeling of being watched when I was alone. A sense that the air in my room was heavier than in the rest of the house. These weren't dramatic movie-style hauntings. There were no voices shouting my name or figures standing in doorways. It was subtler than that, quieter, and somehow that made it worse. As the years passed, I started thinking more about the timing of it all. Nothing like this had happened before my sister died. The house felt normal back then, safe even. Whatever started happening only began after her death, after the trauma had settled into our family like a permanent fog. It was impossible not to draw a connection, even if I didn't know what that connection meant. People like to say that grief can make you imagine things, that trauma can change how you perceive your environment, and maybe there's truth to that. My mother was deeply traumatized. I was a child who had lost a sibling in a violent way. The house was full of pain, silence, and unresolved emotions. That alone could explain a lot. But there are moments that still don't fit neatly into that explanation. The physical movement of objects, the consistency of the activity being centered in my room, the way it happened when no one else was around, when there was no one to reinforce or validate what I was experiencing. So these weren't shared hallucinations. They were events I witnessed alone, over and over again in the same space. As I got older, I noticed something else that was harder to explain than flickering lights or falling objects. I felt tied to the house. You know how in movies about hauntings, there's always that frustrating moment where the audience is yelling at the screen, wondering why the family doesn't just leave, why they stay in a place where horrible things are happening. For a long time, I wondered the same thing. Now, I think I understand it. I feel glued to that house, not in a logical way, not because it's convenient or familiar or financially necessary. It's deeper than that. It feels like a magnet is pulling me back, like there's a connection that goes beyond memory or attachment. I like the house, and I share a history that can't be cut cleanly. Even when I'm away from it, I think about it. I dream about it. It feels less like a building and more like a presence that knows me, that remembers what happened there. The idea of fully cutting ties with it feels wrong in a way I can't articulate. Not scary, exactly, just incomplete. Like leaving would mean abandoning something unresolved. I don't know if that connection is emotional, psychological, or something else entirely. I don't claim to have answers. All I know is how it feels: heavy, sticky, persistent. There's also the uncomfortable thought that my sister's death didn't just affect us as people, but somehow marked the space itself. Trauma has a way of soaking into walls, into routines, into silence. Even if you don't believe in anything supernatural, it's hard to deny that places where extreme pain occurs often feel different afterward. Hospitals, old houses, accident sites. Something lingers, even if it's just memory. Sometimes I wonder if what I experienced was the house reflecting that trauma back at me, or if it was my own mind trying to process something too big for a child to understand, or if it was something else entirely, something that doesn't fit neatly into rational explanations. I know how this sounds. I know that a lot of people will immediately dismiss it. I don't blame them. If I hadn't lived it, I might do the same. It's easier to believe there's always a simple explanation: faulty wiring, childhood imagination, stress, grief, coincidence. But when you live through something like this, explanations don't always bring comfort. What stays with me isn't fear as much as confusion, a constant sense of something unfinished, like there was a door opened that never fully closed, like the house remembers something that the rest of the world wants to forget. Even now, as an adult, I struggle to explain it without sounding dramatic or unstable. I don't tell this story casually. I don't bring it up at parties. It's not something I share lightly, but it's also not something I can pretend didn't happen. There's a loneliness to experiences like this. When strange things happen around you and no one else sees them, you start questioning yourself. You replay moments in your head, wondering if you misremembered them, exaggerated them, misunderstood them. But the memories don't fade. They stay sharp, anchored to specific moments, specific sights and sounds. The books on the floor, the empty wall where pictures used to hang, the light on in the middle of the night. Those details don't blur. They stay fixed. What makes it even harder is knowing that my sister's mental illness complicates everything. When schizophrenia is part of the conversation, people become quick to dismiss anything connected to it. They assume delusion, projection, imagination. But my experiences happened after she was gone. They weren't hers, they were mine. And I was a kid who didn't even know what schizophrenia really was. I don't claim that my house was haunted in the way movies portray hauntings. I don't claim there was a ghost walking the halls, or a spirit trying to communicate. I don't know what it was. I only know what I experienced and how it made me feel. Connected, watched, tethered. If you don't believe any of this, I understand. Truly. All I can say is that this isn't just my story. Other people have spoken about similar experiences connected to trauma, to loss, to places where something terrible happened. You can look up Nelly Peleas if you want another example that mirrors some of what I'm describing. At the end of the day, belief isn't the point. The point is that trauma doesn't always stay inside people. Sometimes it leaks into places, into routines, into memories tied to physical spaces. Sometimes it shows up as flickering lights and moving objects. Sometimes it shows up as a feeling you can't shake, even years later. My sister died when I was 9. My mother was diagnosed with PTSD. And not long after, the house started behaving in ways that none of us could fully explain. Whether you believe that was something supernatural, psychological, or a combination of both, it left a mark on me that never fully faded. I still feel connected to that house, like a magnet, like a past that won't loosen its grip, like something unfinished, waiting quietly in the walls. Back when I was in medical school, there was a moment that quietly changed the way I understood death violence, and how easily the truth can be hidden behind a single line on a report. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies make these things look. There was no music, no sudden revelation, no gasp from the room. Just a body, a form to be examined, and a slow, sinking realization that something was deeply wrong. I was still a student then, spending long hours learning things most people never have to see up close. The morgue was part of our routine. Cold, clinical, fluorescent lit. At first, it's shocking. Then, frighteningly quickly, it becomes normal. You learn to detach just enough to do your job. You learn to focus on anatomy, pathology, cause of death. You learn how to look without really seeing, at least emotionally. That day started like any other. An old woman, around 60 years of age, was brought in dead. Her body arrived wrapped, tagged, and accompanied by paperwork. According to the preliminary report, the cause of death was a snake bite. That alone wasn't unusual where we were. Snake bites happen. Especially in rural or semi-rural areas, they're a known risk. People die from them every year. The report mentioned visible bite marks and signs consistent with ophotoxemia, the toxic effects caused by snake venom. On paper, it looked straightforward. At first glance, it even looked straightforward in person. There were clear bite marks. The surrounding tissue showed changes consistent with envenomation. Swelling, discoloration, the kind of physical signs we were taught to recognize. If you stopped there, if you accepted the report and limited your examination to what was expected, you could easily conclude that this was a tragic but natural accident. But medicine doesn't stop at first impressions. At least it shouldn't. As part of the examination, the body had to be fully undressed. Clothes can hide things. Injuries, marks, patterns. That's why stripping a body is not just procedure, but necessity. What's visible through fabric is never the full story. When her clothes were removed, the room changed. Not physically. The temperature was the same. The lighting didn't shift. But the atmosphere did. Slowly, quietly, in a way that made the air feel heavier. There were bruises, not one or two. Not the kind you'd expect from a fall or an accident. There were multiple contusions all over her body, arms, torso, legs, some fresh, some older. Different stages of healing, different colors, different depths. The kind of bruises that don't come from a single event, but from repeated trauma. They had been carefully hidden by her clothes. Long sleeves covered areas, places that wouldn't easily be seen by neighbors or casual observers. Whoever dressed her knew what they were doing, or at least knew enough to conceal the evidence. At that moment, the snake bite stopped being the whole story. It was immediately evident to anyone trained to look that this woman had been assaulted while she was alive. These were not post-mortem changes. These were not injuries caused during transport. These were inflicted injuries sustained over time. The pattern mattered. The distribution mattered. The age of the bruises mattered. And then came the detail that made it even harder to ignore. The assault was believed to have been carried out by her sons. That conclusion didn't come from nowhere. It came from the context, from the history that slowly emerged, from the quiet admissions and the way the case was spoken about in low voices. Domestic abuse, elder abuse, something that rarely announces itself loudly, and even more rarely ends up fully documented. This woman had lived in a house where violence was normalized enough to leave marks on her body. Standing there, looking at her, I felt something shift inside me. Not shock, exactly, more like a deep, uncomfortable awareness, the kind that settles in slowly and refuses to leave. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. The official cause of death still read snakebite, and medically, that may have been accurate. The venom was there. So the physiological signs were there. The snakebite was real. But once the bruises were discovered, another question surfaced, one that no one in that room could ignore. Was the snake bite truly accidental, or was it intentional? That question hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. In some cases, snakes bite people while they sleep. In others, people step on them by accident. These things happen. But when you place that scenario alongside evidence of repeated physical abuse, the story becomes less clear. When someone lives in an environment of violence, accidents stop feeling accidental so easily. Had she been deliberately exposed to the snake? Had she been left helpless, unable to escape, unable to defend herself? Had the snake bite been allowed to happen, or even facilitated as a way to end a life without leaving obvious blame? There were no easy answers. That's one of the hardest parts about cases like this. Medicine can tell you how a body stopped functioning. It can show you injuries, timelines, physiological responses, but intent lives in a gray space. It requires context, investigation, honesty from people who often have every reason to lie. The bruises told a story her clothes had hidden, a story of pain that likely went unnoticed or unreported for years, a story of an older woman being beaten by the very people who should have been protecting her. As a medical student, you're taught to focus on facts, on measurable things, on what you can prove. But that day taught me something else. It taught me how fragile the truth can be when it depends on systems that don't always look closely enough. If the body hadn't been fully examined, if someone had rushed the process, if the assumption of an accidental snakebite had gone unquestioned, those bruises would have gone unseen. The abuse would have gone undocumented. The woman's suffering would have remained invisible, even in death. I remember thinking about how many times she must have lived with those bruises, how many mornings she woke up sore, how many days she covered herself carefully before leaving the house, how many times she might have considered speaking up, only to decide it was safer not to. Elder abuse is one of the most underreported forms of violence. Older people depend on their families. They fear abandonment. They fear retaliation. They fear not being believed. And sometimes they fear death less than they fear continued suffering. Looking at her body, stripped of the layers that hid the truth, I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet her life must have been, how silent her pain probably was, how even in death her story almost went untold. The doubt about the snakebite never fully resolved, at least not in a way that satisfied the deeper questions. On paper, it remained the cause of death. But in my mind, and in the minds of others who saw those injuries, the case was never that simple. That's something medical school doesn't prepare you for very well. The moral weight of uncertainty, the knowledge that sometimes you can see evidence of a crime, but not enough to stop it from being smoothed over by convenience or lack of proof. I left the morgue that day changed. Not dramatically, not outwardly, but internally, something had shifted. I became more aware of how often abuse hides behind acceptable explanations. How often vulnerable people suffer quietly. How easy it is for society to accept the simplest story and move on. I also learned how important thorough examination is, not just medically, but ethically. Every bruise tells a story. Every injury has context. Every body deserves to be seen fully, not just enough to confirm what's already been assumed. Even now, years later, I think about that woman. I don't know her name. I don't know what her life was like beyond those bruises. I don't know if she ever felt safe. I don't know if anyone ever stood up for her while she was alive. I don't know if the truth was ever fully acknowledged outside that cold room. What I do know is that her body spoke when she no longer could. It revealed a truth that contradicted the neat explanation written on a form. It forced people to look closer, even if the system ultimately didn't know what to do with what it found. That case stays with me not because of gore or shock, but because of its quiet cruelty. because of how ordinary it looked at first, because of how easily it could have been dismissed, and because it reminded me that death investigations aren't just about causes and diagnoses. They're about dignity, about justice, about listening to what the body is trying to tell you. Sometimes the most disturbing stories aren't the ones filled with mystery or spectacle. Sometimes they're the ones where the truth is right there, bruised and silent, almost overlooked. And sometimes the hardest part is knowing that even when you see it, even when you know something is wrong, the answers may never fully come. That old woman died of a snake bite, according to the report. But she also died after a life marked by violence, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea that danger doesn't always come from where we can see it. Not from storms we can track on radar, not from earthquakes we can feel building beneath our feet, but from space, from a direction we can't even look toward properly. That's what makes the torrid meteor stream so frightening when you really sit with it. Not as a passing science headline, but as a real physical thing the Earth moves through every single year. Most people think of meteor showers as something harmless and even beautiful. A streak of light across the night sky, a wish, a photo opportunity, something romantic and distant. What almost no one realizes is that some meteor streams are not just made of dust and pebbles, but of debris large enough to level cities, ignite forests, or permanently alter the climate of the planet. The beta torids are one of those streams. Every year, Earth passes through a trail of debris left behind by a comet. This particular trail is known as the beta torids, and unlike most meteor showers, it is primarily a daytime stream. That alone makes it dangerous in a way most people don't immediately understand. Because the debris approaches Earth from the direction of the sun, it is almost impossible for the majority of telescopes and sky surveys to observe incoming objects in real time. We are effectively flying blind. When astronomers talk about watching the skies, they usually mean scanning the night side of Earth's orbit. Telescopes are designed to look away from the sun because the glare makes observation nearly impossible. But the torids come at us from that exact blind spot. So each year, for a few weeks, Earth moves through this debris field, and we don't truly know what's in it. All we can do is hope. This isn't science fiction. This isn't speculation pulled from movies or disaster fantasies. This is something astronomers openly acknowledge. Each year we cross our fingers, close our eyes metaphorically, and trust that nothing large enough to matter intersects our planet's path. The most famous reminder of what this stream is capable of happened in 1908. In June of that year, a massive explosion occurred over Siberia near the Tunguska River. No crater was found because the object didn't hit the ground. Instead, a chunk of comet debris, roughly 650 feet across, exploded in the atmosphere at around 15,000 feet above the surface. The energy released was staggering. Approximately 800 square miles of forest were flattened. Trees were snapped and laid down in a radial pattern, as if pushed by a giant invisible hand. People hundreds of miles away reported seeing the sky light up. If that same event had occurred over a city instead of remote wilderness, the death toll would have been unimaginable. That object did not come out of nowhere. It came from a debris stream, and evidence strongly suggests it was part of the torrid complex. The truly disturbing part is that Tunguska wasn't a worst-case scenario. It wasn't even close. Most meteors people see during meteor showers are tiny, a grain of rice, a pebble. Maybe at most the size of a soda can. They burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere and create a brief streak of light. That's what people imagine when they hear meteor shower. But the torids are different. This stream is known to contain much larger objects, boulders, house-sized chunks, even objects measured in hundreds of meters. During the 2016 torrid encounter, astronomers detected at least two objects estimated to be over 650 feet in size, entering Earth's atmosphere. That alone should have set off more alarm bells than it did. Those weren't theoretical models. Those were real detections. Astronomers now believe that Earth is not just brushing the edge of this stream, but gradually moving closer to its densest region. In other words, we are entering the heart of it. To understand why this matters, you have to understand where the torrids come from. The torrid stream is debris left behind by a comet known as Encke. At one time, Encke was enormous, estimated to be around 60 miles wide. Over time, it broke apart. What remains today is a much smaller core, roughly 3 miles wide, but that doesn't mean the danger has shrunk. Quite the opposite. The missing mass didn't disappear. It spread. Roughly 57 miles worth of comet material was scattered throughout the inner solar system. Instead of one large object, there are now countless fragments, spread out along the comet's orbit like a cosmic minefield. Astronomers sometimes compare this to a string of pearls, similar to what was seen when comet Shoemaker Levy 9 broke apart before slamming into Jupiter in 1994. The problem is, we don't know where most of those pearls are. Some pieces are small, some are medium, and some, according to current models, could be enormous. There is a general consensus among researchers that fragments as large as 15 kilometers may still exist, undiscovered, hidden within the torrid stream. Objects that size don't just cause regional destruction, they cause global consequences. Now here's the part that truly keeps some astronomers awake at night. Earth is not done passing through this debris. In fact, calculations show that in June of 2032, Earth will pass through the densest known portion of the torrid stream. Not the outer edges, not a thin band, the core. This isn't being dramatized by fringe scientists or internet forums. Mainstream astronomers have openly stated that there is reason for concern. They are not predicting catastrophe, but they are also not dismissing the risk. The language is careful, professional, and measured, but the message underneath is clear. This is not something to ignore. What makes this even more unsettling is the possibility that this stream has already done something far worse than Tunguska in the distant past. There is a hypothesis, not fully confirmed, but taken seriously by many researchers, that the torrid stream was responsible for a massive impact event roughly 12,900 years ago. This event is often referred to as the Younger Dryas impact event. According to this hypothesis, Earth passed through an especially dense region of the torrid debris field during that time. The result was not a single impact, but thousands. Estimates suggest that between 5,000 and 10,000 Tunguska-sized or larger airbursts and impacts occurred within a very short period, possibly as little as an hour. The majority of these explosions are believed to have been concentrated over Greenland, Canada, and what is now the United States. Imagine that for a moment. Not one explosion flattening forests, thousands. The sky lighting up over an entire continent, shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere, fires igniting over vast regions, ice sheets destabilizing, climate systems collapsing almost overnight. This period coincides with a sudden and dramatic cooling of the planet, known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures dropped rapidly. Ecosystems were thrown into chaos. Many large animals went extinct, including mammoths, giant sloths, and short-faced bears in North America. Human cultures that existed at the time show signs of sudden disruption and decline. And then there are the floods. Across cultures, across continents, there are stories of great floods. catastrophic water events that wiped out civilizations and reshaped the land. For a long time, these stories were treated as myths or symbolic tales, but if a massive bombardment destabilized ice sheets and caused rapid melting, especially over Greenland, the resulting floods would have been global and devastating. One potential piece of physical evidence for this event is the Hiawatha crater beneath the Greenland ice sheet. It is a massive impact structure that may date to around the Younger Dryas period. If confirmed, it would be the first direct crater linked to that event. Other possible remnants include the Great Lakes and the mysterious Carolina Bays, elliptical depressions scattered across the southeastern United States that have long puzzled geologists. None of this is settled science, not yet, but enough evidence exists to keep the discussion alive and serious. And that brings us back to the present. Right now, we are entering the Beta Taurids again. For the next couple of weeks, Earth will move through this debris field. Most years, nothing happens. That's true. But that fact can be misleading. Most years, nothing happened before Tunguska either, until it did. The most unsettling aspect of all of this is how little control we actually have. We like to believe we can track threats. We like to believe technology has given us a safety net. But in this case, the direction the debris comes from makes detection extremely difficult. Ground-based telescopes can't look toward the sun. Space-based observatories have limitations. Many of the objects we worry about would only be visible days, hours, or minutes before impact, if at all. There would be no warning sirens, no evacuation orders, no time to react. If a large Taurid fragment intersected Earth's path, the event would unfold faster than most people could comprehend. And depending on size and location, the consequences could range from a regional disaster to something far more severe. What makes this especially eerie is how calmly this reality exists in the background. There are no panic headlines, no daily countdown clocks, no emergency broadcasts, just quiet acknowledgement among astronomers that this is a real risk, even if the probability in any given year is low. Low probability does not mean zero probability. Tunguska proved that. The Younger Dryas hypothesis suggests it may have happened on a much larger scale before, and the upcoming passage through the Taurid core in 2032 means we are not done rolling the dice. There is something deeply humbling about this. It reminds us that no matter how advanced we become, no matter how much control we think we have over our environment, there are still forces moving silently through space that could change everything in a moment. We don't see them, we don't hear them, we can't stop them. All we can do is study, prepare where possible, and hope that Earth's path remains clear. For most people, this will remain abstract, a curiosity, a strange bit of cosmic trivia. But once you understand the scale, once you realize that we are literally moving through a field of debris capable of flattening continents, it's hard not to feel uneasy. Every year we pass through it and nothing happens. And that creates a false sense of security. But space doesn't care about patterns or expectations. It doesn't care that we've been lucky so far. And that's what makes the Beta Taurids so unsettling. Not because something will definitely happen, but because something absolutely could. And if it does, it will come from the one direction we cannot watch, at a time we cannot predict, from debris we know is out there but cannot fully see. That quiet uncertainty is far more terrifying than any sudden disaster, because it means that every year for a few weeks, the safety of the entire planet depends on luck. And in June of 2032, we will be testing that luck more than usual. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.